Thank you so much for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here and to discuss with you all today a little bit about social science research. As you mentioned, most of my research was focused on uh, drinking water access, sanitation, and fecal sludge management. But today I'm going to be talking about wealth, because I thought wealth is something which was very important for interpreting my results, and I think also will be important for almost anyone doing social science research. So I hope it's useful for you all. I'm going to try and share my screen now. Let's see if I'm successful on in doing that. Just a moment, sorry.
Screen.
All right, can everyone see? Is it okay?
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
okay.
Yeah. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes,
Am
yes,
I
sir.
clear?
we can
Yes,
hear
sir.
you.
I'm
And
I'm I'm perfectly clear. No problem. No problems
no,
there.
no problem at all. No problem.
Okay, great. All right. So I want to talk about wealth and its relevance to social science research. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to just stop me anytime. If my speaking isn't clear, or if I say something that you need some clarification, just let me know. I know I have some background noise with my laptop here, so it may be difficult to hear me sometimes, so apologies for that. Um, Also, I have two polling questions, which I added to this presentation. I added these questions because I wanted to have some interaction. I wanted to have some response from all of the participants on the call. In order to participate in this poll, I hope everyone will participate. It's very simple. But in order to participate in this poll, you will need your smartphone. So I will show a link which you can type in to your phone, or to the browser on your phone, or you can just click the QR code. But either way, when you do that, it should take you to that poll where I encourage you all to provide your answers, just so that we can interact and share our experiences. So today I have three parts to my lecture. The first, I want to speak at a high level about what is wealth. And when we talk about wealth, we're going to be talking about things like uh, income, value, assets, and also what they mean in the context of social science research. And in that case, we're going to be talking about production, power, and privilege. Once we've talked a little bit about wealth, then we're going to talk more specifically about measuring wealth. Why do we do that? What can we measure? What are some similar measurements that we might do? And then finally, how do we construct a wealth index? And then the last part, we're really focusing on one way to construct a wealth index, which is using principal components analysis. And I'll say right now, I provide a high-level summary of principal components analysis, but we will not be going very deep into the statistics of it. I'm just going to be providing some key points regarding the statistics. So there will be some statistical equations up there, which I'll explain. But in order to really understand principal components analysis, it requires the use of things like eigenvectors and eigenvalues and matrix algebra, which I'm not sure if everyone has already reviewed. So therefore, I'm just going to give a high-level explanation which doesn't require that you understand those things. But if you want to really get into principal components analysis, then you'll have to study those topics in statistics. Luckily, though, if you're interested in doing a principal components analysis, even if you are not doing the statistics yourself, there are packages available, very easy to use, in different statistical programs such as R or Stata or SPSS, where you can put in your data. The program will do the principal components analysis for you. And then hopefully with some of the guiding principles I provided today, you'll be able to use the output of that package in your own research. That is the goal. And then I want to leave some time at the end for Q&A as well. So any questions about the agenda?
No,
No,
sir.
sir. No, sir.
Okay, I'll proceed then. So I want to start off with a poll. So if everyone can use your smartphone and go to this QR code or type in this address in your browser, it should take you to this survey that I've set up. For this first slide, it's just a word cloud. So I'm going to see if I can, it's separate over here, just a moment, so that you can all see the results. So please go into that. Did everyone get the QR code? I apologize if I took it away too quickly.
ಎಲ್ಲರೂ QR ಕೋಡ್ ಇದು ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡ್ರಿ QR ಕೋಡ್ ಇದೆ ಅಲ್ಲ ಇವ್ರದ್ದು
So if you go into this survey, you should be able to just type in a response. Please put in just a 1 or 2 word response. The question here is,
Yeah, can
what
you
is
say
wealth?
again the QR code
Yes, yes, I
once
can.
again?
Okay, sorry about that.
ಅದನ್ನ ಸ್ಕ್ರೀನ್ ಶಾಟ್ ಹೊಡ್ಕೊರಿ ಗ್ರೂಪ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ
All right, can everyone see that?
Yes, sir.
Yes, yes.
Yes? Okay. So if everyone can use that QR code, go to the survey and then type in 1 or 2 words answering the question, in your opinion, what is wealth? You can give an example. What is wealth? You can say gold. You can say jewelry. You can say friendship. You can say whatever you feel is the most important thing, the best example in your life of what is wealth. Please add 1 or 2 word answers to that survey. And I'll share that word cloud on the screen. Hopefully this is, hopefully we're successful in this. Okay. Can everyone see the slide?
Yes, sir. Yes, Yes, sir. sir.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for your answers. I'm seeing some good variation. If there is more than one person that provides the same answer, then that text will be a little bit larger. So we can see several people added health. I think more people are adding health. A few people added education. Some people are defining wealth as family, knowledge, property, assets, capital. These are all excellent answers. Family, multifaceted. It's true. Wealth is multifaceted. This is also correct. Okay, education, knowledge, relationship, property. These are all given by multiple people. All right, thank you for your sharing. We'll come back to this poll for 2 additional slides, which are some multiple choice questions later on in the presentation. Now I'll go back to my slide deck. All right. So we've all given our answers for what we view as wealth. And now I'm going to discuss a little bit about how it's viewed in social sciences. And you'll see that the answers you gave, I think, fit well into the definitions that I'm going to provide. But first, I wanted to answer the question, why wealth? Why are we talking about wealth? My research is not in wealth. My research, as I said, is in water and sanitation. But wealth is very important for my research because when a household has more wealth, it gives them a greater ability to access water and sanitation. And so wealth is directly important and directly relevant to my research for that reason. And I think in the same way, wealth is very likely to be important for a lot of your research questions as well. Anytime that income or wealth may impact the behaviors that you are researching, it's important to know how to control for that. And so that's why we're talking about wealth today. So in social science research, we're talking about any systematic investigation of human behavior and societal phenomenon. And wealth and income are important for much of that research. It has a cross-cutting relevance. It is one type. It is not the only, but it is one type. It is an important type of proxy measure of an individual's ability to enact or engage in behaviors that require resources or income, or that require power or privilege. A few key terms that I'm going to talk about today, I wanted to present them up front. They will come up again in the next few slides, are wealth. And I'm defining that here as the value of all assets that you own. And in order to understand what this definition means, we also need to have a definition for both value and for assets. So assets, I think, are fairly simple. Asset is any useful or valuable thing. And when we talk about value, and I'm going to go into this a little bit more in detail in a few slides, we need to talk about 2 different types of value: use value and exchange value. We're also going to talk briefly about income. I think income is fairly self-explanatory, but it is also a very important term when we're talking about wealth in social science research. And this is a key concept for the first part of this presentation. When we're talking about wealth and we're talking about the value of assets, as I've mentioned, we're talking about here on the left, value in use and value in exchange. But this is not the only thing that wealth provides for us. Wealth does not just provide for us income if we sell our assets, or income if we use our assets in a productive way to produce work or income or goods that we can sell. It also, when you have wealth, provides these social goods of power and privilege. And when you have power and privilege, it means that you have greater access. greater access to enact whatever social behavior might be the focus of your social science research question. So let's expand our definition a little more. We've already said that wealth is the value of all assets that you own. We'll clarify here and say that it is both physical and intangible assets. And that it might not just be owned by a person. Assets can also be owned by a community, by companies, by a country. And when we are talking about total wealth of a person, a household, a community, or a company, you must also subtract whatever debt is owed. So it's a net value. Assets minus debts. So these are some things that I think came up in our word cloud, but just very basic examples of assets that have value. A house, TV, chairs, cooking pots, cars, and these are all tangible things that we provide that are useful to us. But it's also tangible things that maybe don't have a specific use for us, or maybe are just used to beautify, like jewelry. Or it could be, assets could also just be gold bars that have a value in exchange, but don't have a value in use. It could be something that is specific for production. So this is a value in use that has a productive use. So in this case, this is a picture of a tractor. So it's an asset that we would use in farming in order to produce a good that we can then sell and earn income from. But assets don't have to be physical things. Another type of asset, for another example of an example of an intangible asset is someone's education. So in this case, earning your diploma can be an asset for when you try and sell your labor in the labor market. But it's not a physical thing that you can touch. It's your education. And as I mentioned before, I want to focus a little bit on the question of value. And as I've mentioned, we're going to talk about value in use and value in exchange. And in order to explain that, those two different types of value, I want to quote Adam Smith, who's the father of modern economics. And he has a very famous quote where he says, "Nothing is more useful than water, but it will purchase scarce anything. Scarce anything can be had in exchange for it." And I think this is a perfect example of the difference between value in use and value in exchange. Water is extremely valuable. We use it to preserve life, to preserve our health. We also use it to do very productive things for businesses and companies. But it's very cheap. When you try and buy water in the market, especially if you're getting water through a tap, you will pay almost nothing for it. On the contrary, a diamond doesn't have any value. I mean, it has very little value. Most people that own diamonds don't derive any use value from it. But it has a great value in the market. So it has a high exchange value. And that's because exchange values are also dependent on the cost of production, the scarcity, and the demand. And the scarcity of diamonds is very high. And so for that reason, the exchange value is also high. But the use value is low. So as I've said, the use value is the utility or the practical use. And the exchange value is dependent on what you can get for that asset in the market. And as I've mentioned, exchange value depends on scarcity, production cost, and demand. But use value can depend on a productive use. So perhaps a tractor, the value of a tractor might be based on how productive it is at producing agricultural products. But a use value does not have to be productive. This is a very high level, broad definition of this thing. It can also be subjective. So, for example, if you have a, a, a memento from a grandparent who has since passed on, it might be just a book, or it might be a blanket, or a statue, or something. It may have a very low exchange value because people don't understand the sentimental emotions associated with that. But because you have those attached emotions, you have a high use value for it. You derive a lot of happiness from owning that item because of the associated memories. And so when we say use value, this might depend on productive use, but it can also just be a subjective assessment of the happiness that that product brings you. All right, so this link and QR code should go back to the same survey. Hopefully, if it's operating properly, you should be able to go forward to the second slide. I would like you, I request you to fill out, answer the question in the second slide and the third slide. And this will be the last time that we do this. So I appreciate everyone's patience on this. But if you can again use that QR code, go back to the survey. In the second slide, we have the question, what has value in use? And in the third slide, we have what has value in exchange. And I've listed out all of the, I've listed out in words, all of the assets that you can see on this slide. And so I want everyone to give your opinion. What are your thoughts? For each of these assets, does it have value in use and or does it have value in exchange? So does it have value in use and also value in exchange? Or does it only have value in use or only have value in exchange? So if everyone can go to that survey, let me try and display that, share my screen on that survey again so we can see everyone's answers. So you'll see, please mark all items that have value in use. So if everyone can go to this second slide and just mark, you should be able to mark whatever items you would like. You can mark as many as you would like. And then we'll have a tally of everyone who has marked each item. All right, I see a lot of value in use. Pretty much everything across the board, except for a diploma. A few people have said that all other things have value in use, but not a diploma. So there we do have some distinctions. It seems value in use has high marks when it comes to a house or jewelry or gold bars. Now remember, value in use means either productive value or it means subjective value. So either it makes you happy or you're able to produce income from it. All right, I think we've got a good number of answers, so we can see it seems like pretty much everyone agrees that house and jewelry have a value in use, and a tractor, we have fewer votes for a tractor and fewer votes for a diploma. All right, now let's go to the next slide. If everyone can also answer for the next slide. I see some people already have. Thank you for that. Please mark all items that have value in exchange. So these are assets that you can take to the market and sell. So if it has value in exchange, that means that it has a market price. That means that someone else will buy that from you at a price which is agreed upon for all market participants. So it's sort of a social agreement on what the value of that asset might be. So if you can go and bring it to the market and sell it, that's value in exchange. We can see jewelry, gold bars, a car. Yes? Sorry?
No, sir. No, sir.
Oh, okay.
Continue, sir.
What is a
All
diploma,
right.
sir? So what is a diploma?
Diploma is a
A, yeah, degree. All right, so I see a lot of people are putting gold bars, car. A few people are putting tractor, house, diploma, and fewer people are putting chairs or cooking pots. I suppose if you own chairs or cooking pots, it's a little bit more difficult to sell them, especially if they're used. All right, so I think people are getting the idea. We have value in use and value in exchange. That's the important concepts from this. Now let me see if I can go back to my slides. Appreciate everyone's patience as we go back and forth. Okay, so now we're back. Does anyone have any questions so far about wealth, value in use, value in exchange, productive use? All right, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to let me know. Okay, so we've talked about what is wealth, and we've talked about value. Now I want to briefly, just for one slide, talk about assets. What are assets? And I think assets are fairly clear. We've talked about many different kinds of assets, physical and intangible. We've talked about a degree versus a house. But there is a subtlety here that I want to emphasize. So in this example, Brian Tracy, who is a motivational speaker from Canada, and I like this subtle distinction in this quote here. He said, "Your greatest resource is your time, but your greatest asset is your earning ability." So in a sense, you have your time. Your time is a resource. You can choose to spend your time engaging in leisure activities, or you can choose to spend your time selling your labor in the labor market and doing some work for which you get paid. And when you use your time in the labor market and it produces some kind of value, it produces income, you get paid for that time, then your time is an asset. But it's not correct to say that all of your time is an asset. Time becomes an asset when value is ascribed to it. That is an inherent part of being an asset. When it is just time, which can be used for either productive activities or for leisure, then it is a resource. So broadly speaking, any time that you have is a resource, and when you use it productively, it becomes an asset. So I just want to make very clear that when we're talking about assets, we're talking about something that has value, either value in use or value in exchange. And just briefly, I want to make this distinction between wealth and income. I think it's probably already clear to everyone here, but I didn't want to skip it. So when we're talking about wealth, we're talking about a stock. This is a fixed amount of something. This is a house, it's a degree, it's a chair, it's a car. When we're talking about income, that's a flow. So that's an amount that happens every week or every day or every month. It's something that happens over time. It's not so much fixed. When you have income, you can either spend it on wealth or you can spend it on consumption. And the distinction here for our purposes is that wealth can in turn create more income, whereas consumption does not. Consumption is spent, it's consumed, it's gone. But wealth, when you spend income and create wealth, wealth can then in turn also create income. And when wealth creates income, that is called the productive value of wealth. So this is, again, another way that we can value wealth, and it is part of the use value, but it is a subset of the use value. It's the productive value of wealth. Now, just a few concrete examples. I think that all of that was sort of a high-level theoretical exploration, but I also wanted to share a few concrete examples. So here we have a ratio of wealth to income. This is for India. I think it's covering from 1996 up until 2022. And you can see that this ratio increases over time. So as incomes increase, as the GDP increases, wealth also increases. But in addition to that, the ratio of wealth to income can also rise. So in this case, we're seeing that while income has increased, wealth has increased at a much higher rate than income. And now for every rupee that you own, whereas in 1996, you might have 3.8 rupees, in 2022, on average, across the entire country, for every rupee of income that you will have almost 6 rupees in wealth. So we've talked a lot about value, different kinds of value, how valuation is intrinsic and is an intrinsic part of the definition of an asset, and how all of that provides our definition for what is wealth. But wealth is actually more than that. Wealth also has social significance beyond just productive use or beyond just exchange value or use value. Wealth also provides status and power. And when you have status and power, then you also have privileged access. And so you can see that it's not just that if you have more wealth, you have more money, you have more ability to buy things. But when you have more wealth, you are also perceived as being more powerful. And when that happens, then it's more likely that you are going to be able to enact whatever social behavior it is that you are researching. So whenever you're researching that specific social behavior, you have to take this into account. You have to control for it. You have to understand that whatever population you're looking at, if there are certain people in that population that have more wealth, they are also going to have more status, more power, and more privileged access because of that. So coming back to this key concept, we see that wealth has value in use and value in exchange, but it also separately has power and privilege. So in summary, this is just the first part, the first third of this presentation. But in summary, so far we've seen that wealth is the exchange value of all assets, useful or valuable things that you own. The productive value of wealth produces resources or income, which can be used to enact or engage in behaviors. And the power and privilege that wealth provides, the power and privilege of wealth also provides access, which also can separately allow the engagement in behaviors that require access. Conversely, a lack of wealth or a lack of income can also mean a lack of access. And in this case, when there is a lack of wealth or a lack of income or a lack of access, these can be a limiting factor preventing the specific behavior that you might be looking for. Now, because I hope I've convinced you that wealth is relevant to most social science research questions, not all, but a lot. I hope that you also can see the value in measuring wealth. So let's talk a little bit about that. And I should say that we've been talking a lot about wealth, and the reason why I'm focusing on wealth is not because income is unimportant. Actually, income is very important. Wealth is only important because it is a proxy for income. But when we're talking about social science research, it's important to consider the feasibility of the research that we're doing. And it is absolutely possible to track income at the household level, for example, or at the community level, at the personal level. But it is very difficult to do that for a few different reasons. One, most income is not directly observable. And two, because wealth and income are so associated with status and privilege and power in society, when you as a researcher come into a household and ask survey questions, for example, the respondent is interacting with you socially. And so they will feel a social pressure to give you certain answers. So if you're asking about income, they may feel pressure to give you a larger number than is the truth. And so this will produce bias in your research. There can still be bias when we're measuring wealth. It is not guaranteed to be free from bias. But because wealth is often tied, not always, as we've seen, but it is often tied to physical things, it's much easier to collect data on them. It's much easier to go to a household and ask them, how many rooms do you have? How large is your household? How many chairs do you have? How many TVs? Do you own a car? Do you own a laptop? And so we can use these observable physical things as a proxy for wealth, and by extension, as a proxy for income as well. It's not a perfect proxy, but it is easier to track and less prone to bias. But income is important. Income does increased income does increase your ability to enact the behaviors that you want to do. So it's important to understand that it's important to not discard income or discredit income. Here you can see this graph of GDP and the GDP per capita and the annual growth rate of GDP per capita in India from 1960 until 2023. You can see it was growing very slowly and then started growing very rapidly after 2000. And income or GDP per capita at the national level is an important way for tracking growth over time. It's also an important way to allow us to compare across countries. So if we're tracking GDP per capita, which is a kind of national income, it's a standard procedure, it's a standard metric that allows us to track differences across different countries. Wealth, on the other hand, could be used to track progress over time or differences between countries, but it's more often used to track inequality within a population. So in this example, we see long-run wealth inequality in India. The different lines here, you can see the legend at the bottom. We have the bottom 50% of the population, the middle 50%, and the top 10%. This is based on wealth again. And as you can see over time, the bottom 50%, as a percentage of the total wealth in the country, that portion has decreased slightly. For the middle 40%, it has the proportion owned, not the total amount, but the proportion owned has decreased significantly. And for the top 10%, the proportion has increased significantly, especially since around the late 80s. You can also track the distribution of assets into different categories. This can be interesting to see the makeup of wealth over time and how that shifts. So, for example, and this is again an example from India, between 1981 and 2018, roughly 80% of national wealth were in land and buildings across that entire period. But you can see that the proportion of wealth that was held in livestock decreased significantly, while the proportion of wealth that was held in financial assets increased significantly. So you can see how wealth is being held in different ways over time as incomes increase. Tracking wealth in and of itself, or tracking income in and of itself, are valuable things to do. It is reasonable to have a policy goal by the government to increase incomes and increase wealth. But it's not everything. There is sometimes an overemphasis on GDP per capita. And I think that that is because it is easier to count everything that goes into GDP per capita or everything that goes into GDP, because everything in GDP is found in the market. Everything has a price, everything has a market value. And so it's much easier to assign a value to those things. But there are things that provide value and use to us outside of things that have value in exchange that are still valuable, that are not included in GDP. And some examples here are health, happiness, freedom, accountability, like government accountability, for example, stability in the economy or in the climate, trust, public trust, trust between neighbors, nature, the health of nature, ecosystem health, and then overall physical safety and a lack of crime. These are all things that you can put values to, but they don't have a market value. And so it is a little bit more challenging to put values to them. But that doesn't mean that they're not important. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't be pursued through policy goals. And there are also indexes that try and track these other types of things beyond just tracking wealth. And I added some examples here with some links. If you're able to get to the slides later, I'll definitely share them. So you can look at these examples of the Human Development Index, which also incorporate life expectancy, education, and income, in addition to income. The Quality of Life Index has many different parameters that are included. A few are listed here: safety, health, pollution. And the OECD Better Life Index also includes things like community, environment, personal satisfaction. So there's many things that you can include in indexes that are useful for policy goals, social science research, etc., that go beyond health. So I want to make sure that everyone understands that health is not always the best policy end goal. It's not always, it should not always be the focus, but I am focusing on it today because it is useful for social science research, as I've mentioned. So for the rest of the lecture, we're not going to be talking about wealth as policy. We're not going to be talking about wealth really as an output. We're going to be talking about wealth much more as an input. And if wealth is an input for whatever social science research question you have, then it's important to try to control for that. And one way to control for that is by collecting wealth data when you collect your other data and then creating a wealth index across your sample population. So what is a wealth index? Well, the most widely used wealth index is from the DHS, and the DHS wealth index is constructed as a composite measure. As I've mentioned, it's calculated using easy to collect data on household ownership of selected assets, such as televisions and bicycles. It also incorporates materials used for housing construction and types of access, for example, access to water and sanitation facilities. And there's a link there if you want to learn more about the DHS Wealth Index construction. And this is an example from our own research. This research was produced in collaboration with Narayan sir. So in our research, we were looking at continuous water service and intermittent water service in Hubli Dharwad. And we wanted to compare populations that had continuous water service, or CWS, and intermittent water service, or IWS. And specifically, we wanted to know if people spent more money under continuous water service. But it's clear that if you are a more wealthy household, then you're going to have more income and you're going to use more water and then spend more water. So it would not make sense to just have an average for the whole city, because wealth and income have a direct impact on expenditures for your monthly water. We needed to make sure to collect data, collect proxy variables that we could use to create a wealth index. And then we segregated, we had these strata of wealth quintiles based on the wealth index that we created. And we saw that in the poorest wealth quintile, the expenditures were much lower than in the highest wealth quintile, which is to be expected. And so this reinforces that we created our wealth index correctly. We also could see, because we had this wealth index and we created these wealth quintiles, we also could see that the increase in expenditure was there in the lowest wealth quintile, but it was much larger in the highest wealth quintile. And so that allowed us to see the impact of the change in expenditure due to wealth, which was very important for our research purposes. Any questions about this?
So regarding the decomposition of total wealth,
Yes.
so there is a increasing in the land and building. Why not for the livestock? All those things, sir. The people will go for maximum for land and buildings rather than the livestock. The reason for that, sir.
Oh, you mean in the previous slide? Do you mean in this slide?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, as you can see, it's pretty constant that land and building are the most important assets. They take up the largest proportion of wealth. I think as we see the proportion of wealth moving out of livestock and into financial assets, keep in mind this doesn't mean that there's less livestock. It just means that the proportion of the total wealth in livestock is less. So as wealth increases, this means that the wealth in livestock either didn't increase or increased more slowly, or perhaps decreased. So I think this is reflective of the overall production within the economy. So if less of the wealth is being put in livestock, that means less of the income is being derived from agriculture. And if more of the wealth is being put in financial assets, that means more of the income and more of the wealth and therefore more of the income is being derived from companies, from manufacturing and from services, probably in urban areas. So that's how this shift is coming out. But as you can see, the vast majority remained in land and building, and that was constant. Did that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, so a very simple thought exercise. If we want to create a wealth index, then let's say we have data from 100 households and we've asked them whether or not they have access to a toilet and whether or not they own the following: a washing machine, a water storage tank or roof tank, an underground storage tank, AC, or a fridge. Now, the simplest way to create a wealth index from this would just be to assign 1 point to each of these items. And then the more points you have, the higher your wealth index score. And that's what we have here. This is the simplest wealth index. But there are some problems with this index. The first thing I want to point out is that for these 5 households, we see the exact same pattern for toilet access and for roof tank ownership. Likewise, we see the exact same pattern in this example of AC and fridge ownership. Now, obviously, this is entirely synthetic. I made this up in order to create a point, but it is something that could occur naturally. You will find that when you are collecting a large amount of asset data from a large number of households, that there will be certain assets that are highly correlated. So this means that the likelihood that a household owns both of them at the same time is very high. And if that's the case, then we're not actually getting more information by including both of the assets in our wealth index. And so it's useful to try and weight each asset by a certain amount rather than just assigning it a value of 1. And you might weight assets that are highly correlated slightly lower because they provide less information about a person's wealth status. Also notice here in this example that the poor households, so I've arranged them so that the first row is the poorest household, and the bottom row is the richest household. And you can see that by looking at the index on the right. So household number 1 has an index score of 1. But household number 1 has an underground tank. And household number 2 has an index score of 3, the second lowest. But it also has an underground tank. So in this example, only the poor households have an underground tank. So does it make sense to assign a value of +1 for an asset that seems correlated with low wealth? And again, it might make sense to create a weight to make these items have a negative score so that their relative score will be less. I think this is just a review of what I've just said, but basically, also there is also the case where if you have an asset, for example, if 99 out of 100 households have a toilet, then including that asset variable in your wealth index does not add any information because everyone has a toilet. So it's not really an indicator of anything. Likewise, if no one owns an AC unit except for one household, then again, it doesn't provide any extra information on the sample population overall. It only provides information on that one house, which is of very little use to your overall research question. So in order to address these issues of trying to create proper weights based on whether or not variables are correlated and whether or not variables are an indication of high wealth or low wealth, PCA was found to be an easy to use, robust technique, statistical technique in order to address these kinds of issues. So with PCA, this is principal components analysis. You're able to extract the information from a data set in a very simple way. And it's used not just in wealth index creation, but it's also used extensively in microbiology, in image processing, in AI, in bioinformatics. It's a very simple technique, but it has very powerful results. Now, when you're doing PCA, you can use this slide deck, but I think an even better guide would be to go to one of these two papers, or maybe both. And they have a really clear step-by-step explanation of how to do PCA and why to do each step with examples. So I would recommend that anyone who wants to do a PCA in order to create a wealth index, please go use these resources. And from that first paper that I had listed, they provided two main reasons for why you should do a PCA when you're doing a wealth index. The first is that some variables may have different relationships with socioeconomic status across subgroups. The example they gave is ownership of farmland may be more reflective of wealth in rural areas. Another reason is that each variable used individually may not be sufficient to differentiate household socioeconomic status. And it was for the reasons that I've already mentioned. A majority may own the same item, or a small number may own that item. When you're using PCA to create a wealth index, there's 4 steps. And I have, I think, 1 or 2 slides for each of these steps, except for step number 2. I have a number of slides there just so that you can get some flavor of the statistics. But again, I'm not going to go deep into the statistics, so don't worry if there's some equations or some values that you haven't seen before. I'm just going to give you the importance of those, not how to do them. So the first step is to select your asset variables. As part of this process, you have to start out by doing a set of descriptive analyses for all the variables. So that means that you need to calculate, and this should be fairly easy to do in any statistical program. It should have some pretty standard packages there. So for all of your asset variables that you're considering including, you should calculate the means, the frequencies, and the standard deviation. Then you should select assets that are more unequally distributed. This is because they have more information about wealth, and they will receive a higher weight in your PCA. You don't need to include all assets. You should include the assets that have some variation over the sample and that are not correlated with each other, or are as minimally correlated as possible. Again, an asset in which all households own or no households own would have zero standard deviation. And so it will have a zero weight and it will have very little use in your wealth index. Now, moving into the application of the PCA, again, this will all be done through a statistical program. You will not need to do any of this yourself, but I just want to go over what's being done by the statistical program at a very high level. So the PCA calculates eigenvalues and eigenvectors for your asset variables. And I'm going to explain the significance of those two terms. I realize they're probably new for people here. Eigenvalues and eigenvectors are statistical estimates that measure the variance and the covariance between variables. If you have a larger covariance, that means you're going to have a larger eigenvalue, and it will result in larger weights for your scoring. I'm guessing most people know at least what a covariance is, but just in case you don't, this is the definition of what a covariance is. So if you have an asset variable X and an asset variable Y, to calculate the covariance, you have to, for each household, subtract the population average from that household for X and for Y, multiply them, sum all of those, and then divide by the total sample size minus 1. So this is a kind of average, but it's an average across two different variables. It's a way to see how much they vary with each other. So if the two variables are very, very similar, you will have a very high covariance. If the two variables almost never occur at the same time, then you will have a very low covariance. When you're using your statistical package to do your PCA, what it is doing, it is calculating the covariance across each and every pair of your asset variables. So if you select 5 asset variables, then it's going to collect the covariance between the first and the second, the first and the third, the first and the fourth, the first and the fifth, and then between the second and the third, the second and the fourth, the second and the fifth, etc. It's going to capture the covariance between each asset variable pair. And then within the statistical program, it's going to create a matrix with all of those covariances. Again, if you don't know what this is, it's okay, but this is what's happening under the hood. This is what's happening inside the statistical program. It's then going to take that covariance matrix and calculate the eigenvectors and the eigenvalues. Eigenvectors and eigenvalues are just a statistical way of estimating the overall variance between different variables. So for example, it is also true that if you sum up the variance of all of your variables, it will equal the sum of all of your eigenvalues. So it's just another way of expressing variance across a sample. In the example that you have two asset variables, you will end up with two eigenvalues and two eigenvectors. If you have 5 asset variables, then your PCA analysis will produce 5 eigenvalues and 5 eigenvectors. That number is always going to be equal. But when you get your list of eigenvalues and eigenvectors, you should first look at the eigenvalue that's the largest. That indicates that the most information, the most variance is estimated by that eigenvalue and eigenvector pair. So in this example, this is just an example with two different eigenvalues and two different eigenvectors. We can see lambda 1 is the larger eigenvalue of 1.284, and lambda 2 is the smaller eigenvalue of 0.0490. As I mentioned before, the sum of those two equals the sum of the total variance. But that also means that if you sum them together, you get 1.333. And then if you divide 1.28 by 1.333, so that's lambda 1 over the total, you see that lambda 1 actually accounts for 96.3% of the variance. So when you're creating your wealth index, it is often only necessary to take the first eigenvalue and the first eigenvector and then throw away the rest. You can do more than one, but most people just do the first one. So when your statistical program produces this first component, that first component will have a vector which you can then use to score the asset value for each household. So you're basically multiplying that vector across each household. Once the factor score for each asset variable is multiplied by the variable itself for each household, then all of those are summed together for a total wealth index score for that household. And all of this is done within the statistical program. So in the end, once you've taken your first component with all of your factor scores, multiplied it for each household, that produces a wealth index score for each household. Then you need to actually verify. You need to look at all those wealth index scores and visually, does it make sense? Look at the factor scores for the different assets. For example, we know that laptops are very expensive. So if laptops was one of the assets that you were tracking and the factor score is negative for a laptop, something went wrong. Likewise, if you have, so I think that's, you want to make sure that the factor scores make sense, and you want to make sure that the wealth index scores for each household make sense. So you can look and see at the ownership for each household and kind of just looking at the ownership qualitatively understand, in general, is that a richer household or a poorer household? And if the richer households are getting lower scores, then something has gone wrong. You need to check your work, go back and perhaps do it again. Generally, a variable with a positive factor score is associated with higher socioeconomic status. Conversely, a variable with a negative factor score is associated with lower socioeconomic status. And it is useful to note that in some studies, ownership of durable assets can be attributed with a negative weight from a PCA. So this happens when low-income households are more likely to own a certain asset. So in some communities, that might be a bicycle. It might be more likely for a low-income household to own a bicycle and for a high-income household to own a car or a rickshaw or something like that. So there are certain assets that indicate lower wealth, and those might have negative factor scores. That's okay. The last step when you're doing a PCA analysis to create a wealth index is to then separate out your sample into different strata. So here you can see that they were separated into quintiles. You can also do quartiles. It's really up to you. But you have to select the threshold scores such that each strata has the same number of households. But that's really all there is to it. These are selected by you. This is not usually done by the statistical program, although I think it could be. But you would look at your sample size. You would say, okay, I want 5 groups, and I have to separate out an equal number in each group. What is the score that will let me do that? What's the threshold score between each group that will let me do that? And then you set it to that score. This is because these scores are all relative, and they are all only applicable to the sample which was used to create the wealth index. When you create a wealth index using this PCA approach, it is not applicable outside of your sample. You could use the same asset variables for a different sample, but you would have to do a new PCA analysis on those same asset variables. And this is just the example again, but I think we're running out of time, so I'll just jump to the conclusion. In summary, wealth provides productive use, power, and privilege. Having wealth can increase an individual's ability to engage with social behavior, and lacking wealth can decrease the same ability. This makes wealth relevant for most social science research questions. And PCA is an easy-to-use, important tool for creating a more robust wealth index available in most statistical programs. Okay, any questions? I know there was a lot of statistics in there. It might have been a little bit high level, but hopefully people at least understood a little bit about the importance of using PCA analysis.
Sir, with respect to the, sir, hello.
Yes?
So with respect to the health and happiness and freedom, the how we will going to measure it, sir? That is that I can't understand those things.
I'm actually I'm not an expert on those things. I would encourage you to go to those links that I provided in those slides.
Okay.
I do know that when it comes to, I have seen in the past, again, I'm not an expert on it, but I have seen in the past that sometimes people will do like a 10-point scale and ask people to just report their level of happiness or something like that. So I think for a lot of these things that don't have market valuation, creating a score or a metric is very challenging and can be somewhat subjective. So I think they're not perfect. But I think that it was recognized that they are still necessary to track, and so people have just done the best that they can.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Any questions from the participants? Ganesh, ಏನು ಕೇಳ್ತೀರಿ? ಮ್ಯೂಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ರಿ, ಗಣೇಶ್ ಅವ್ರು ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರೆ
ಅನ್ಮ್ಯೂಟ್.
ಮ್ಯೂಟ್ ಇದೆ.
No question.
ನೋ ಕ್ವಶನ್. Only one clarification, sir. With respect to the construction of this giving the weights, sometime we use for a TV, we use 5 weight and then 5 marks scaling kind of thing, For TV, 5 score will be there, laptop, 15 scores will be there. For that, any standardized measures are there, or people, researcher has to use genuinely, he has to give the weights, sir?
And so it's not required to do to create weights through PCA. I tried to provide some reasons why it may be of value, but you may not be able to do PCA. You may not have time. You may find that it doesn't provide more information. If you have a very simple wealth index from just a few assets, and you feel that it's not necessary to do this extra PCA analysis, that's still valid. So certainly, I don't want to communicate that PCA is the only way to go. It's not, but it is something I think to consider in some cases.
Okay. Comparatively, PCA is the good one compared to all other weights who give the weight with give the construction of index using the weights for different assets. Different weight will be given. Then further, those will be scaled and given the ranks. Compared to all other indexing methods, PCA is the best one, sir, according to you, sir.
So I think PCA is the most robust.
Uh-huh.
PCA is not the most expedient. So if you need to be more expedient, you need to do something a little bit quick, a little bit less robust. Sometimes that's necessary. But I do think that PCA is the most robust.
Okay. Okay, sir. Any questions from the participants? Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Then thank you very much, Zachary Burt, sir, for giving a wonderful lecture on construction of PCA as well as wealth index. We are very much grateful to you on behalf of CMDR, on behalf of all the participants, and on my own behalf. I take this opportunity to thank you. Thank you all. Thanks a lot, sir. We'll have one group photo in the website only. We'll have one group photo. Please on your mic, this one camera. Everyone. ನೀವೆಲ್ಲ ಬಂದ್ರಿ. ಇದನ್ನ mute ಮಾಡಿ. ಓಪನ್ ಮಾಡಿದೆ ಬರ್ರಿ, ನೀವೆಲ್ಲ ಬಂದ್ಬಿಡಿ ಈ ಕಡೆ. ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಅಲ್ಲೇ ಇರ್ತದಲ್ರಿ, ನೀವು ಇದ್ರಲ್ಲೇ ಕೂಡ್ರಿ. ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗ್ಬಲ್ಲ ನಿಮ್ದು. ಹಾಂ ಇಷ್ಟೇ ರೀ. ಹಾಂ ಯಾವ ಗ್ರೂಪ್ ಫೋಟೋ ತೆಗೀರಿ ನೋಡೋಣ ಮುಂದೆ. ಓಕೆ ಸ್ಕ್ರೀನ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಬರ್ರಿ, ನೀವು ಕೊಡ್ರಿ. ವಿಂಡೋ ಶಿಫ್ಟ್
ಕಮಾಂಡ್ ಶಿಫ್ಟ್
ಕಮಾಂಡ್ ಶಿಫ್ಟ್ 3
ಬಂದಿರಿ ಸರ್.
3
ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ಸ್
Thank you, Jack.
Hello. Hello.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's a pleasure.
Hello. Thank you, Jack.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Hello.
Hello, I can hear you.
Thank you, Jack. It's
Yeah,
an
thank you.
For you now.
So also, also just one more thing. Sorry, I'm adding a link to the chat. If anyone is interested, you can access my slide deck through that link. You should be able to. I'll also send my slide deck to Narayan, sir.
Yeah.
So you can also share it if anyone is interested.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
we'll share. And then we are sorry for making you in the midnight class. Sorry for that.
No problem. No problem at all. It's my pleasure.
Okay, okay. Thanks.
Thank
Thanks
you
a
very
lot.
much.
Thanks.